So I was just going out tonight and somebody sent me a message on YouTube, and I think it was meant to be nasty, but he said something like, poor old Barry, staring into a cup of hot chocolate or deciding whether to make a YouTube video, something like that anyway. So I wasn't going to make a video tonight, and then I thought, well, yeah, I should do. You know, I've got such a lot to kind of talk about, and I'll start this video with another kind of alias Smith & Jones quote. Right at the beginning, Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry have been in the outlaw business all their life, and they're being chased by a posse firing at them, and Kid Curry says to Hannibal Hayes, "There's one thing we gotta get, Hayes." "What's that?" "Out of this business." One thing we've got to get, Hayes, out of this business. That's the way I feel at the moment. Love the car job, but I think I'm going to retire. I've virtually made my mind up that I'm going to retire before I think the shit's going to hit the fan. And I kind of want to address a couple of things before I go, just to make sure just to make sure that these people can't get away with it too easily. And to be fair, I'll probably be doing more videos because I'll have more time when I retire. So this one's about tyres, EV tyres especially. There's kind of a lot of talk about EV tyres. First of all, they were saying EVs were responsible for potholes, and you know, they're gonna, like, car parks are gonna collapse, all that sort of stuff. That's silly talk. Although I do think that they could be partly responsible for potholes. They go through tyres like crazy. Every time you look on an MOT, there's either a buckled wheel or a split tyre. But the thing that got me started was, first of all, I'll tell you, little book of EV myths. EV tyres cause high levels of particulate pollution. Scientific research is certainly needed to properly establish EV tyre particulate pollution. But for context, a Range Rover weighs 2.7 tonnes, and nobody is complaining about the tyre pollution from SUVs. That's fair enough. They're always on about low MU tyres. It quite worries me that, because low MU means low coefficient of friction, and to me that makes me wonder how they corner if they've got low friction tyres on. Why aren't they always skidding off? You know, Porsches, when they first came out, they used to lose the back end. The engine was the back end of the car. You'd go around the corner and you'd feel it going. Anyway, so that's that. But what really got me, this is an RAC report, do electric vehicles produce more tyre and brake pollution than petrol and diesel cars? By Dr. Ewan McTurk. I mean, I thought Barry Crampton was a bad name, but crikey, that's horrific. Plug Life Consulting for the RAC, March 2022, and he's a battery doc. Now I know that when you're smart you can do all sorts of stuff, but I also know that when you're smart, I've got a mate, he's as clever as anything, but you ask him to open a can of corned beef or something like that and he wouldn't be able to do it, he'd struggle. So I also know that sometimes being smart can't be applied to everyday life. You can solve all sorts of equations and send somebody to the moon, but you can't do everyday things, and you're not an expert on stuff. Now, this Ewan McTurk, I became aware of him quite a while ago. When I first wanted to know about EVs, I started watching all sorts of videos, and his videos, you know, he had a Nissan Leaf and he was going round Scotland. And one of the first things I remember him saying was he was going up a big hill in somewhere in Scotland, and he said, you know, an EV will get up this whereas a nice car would struggle. Well, a nice car wouldn't struggle, honestly. A diesel would go up in fourth gear because of the low end torque. So, you know, fair enough. He only looks young as well, so Nissan Leaf, I was assuming, I don't know how old he is, I was assuming it was perhaps his first car. He's making YouTube videos. Every credit to him, doing a good job. So, this report is to debunk study by somebody else. It was on the it was made on the back of remarks made by the Environment Secretary, George Eustice. So it was to basically dispel what he said. So it says, let's first look at the brakes when slowing a car down. The brake pads are pressed against the brake disc, emitting a fine particulate matter dust in the process. While this happens with all vehicles, brake use and therefore brake wear on electric vehicles is substantially less than on petrol and diesel cars. This is because in EVs, the overwhelming majority of braking can be done via regenerative braking. This is where the electric motor works in reverse, converting kinetic energy from the moving vehicle into electricity. So it's got momentum, and that momentum is converted to electricity. That's used to charge the battery when slowing down. This not only reduces the use of the mechanical brake discs and pads, but adds more range to the vehicle too. Well, I don't think that's a good thing. I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything about batteries. I know a bit about trying to stop quickly. I've done a fair bit of driving in my time on motorbikes and so on. And, you know, all you have to do is watch the motorbike Grand Prix or superbikes, and you notice when they're trying to slow down quickly, they're not hunkered down anymore. They go to brake and they're up as much as they can. Wind resistance. I think wind resistance is the key to braking. It's also the key to long tyre life. It's the key to long brake life, your transmission wear, your suspension, and so on. If you drive by hypermiling, your car will last longer, so will all its components. That's it. No strain on them. It's the wind holding the car body back. 60% of a car's energy is used moving air out of the way from the front, overcoming wind resistance and so on. So anyway, that's that. So we'll just go on to the next one. Here we go. EV brake pads, lifespans up to 100,000 miles. Right, so they talk about a few taxis. Well, they're around town. They're not going very fast anyway. And again, wind resistance and so on. Slow them down, and the Regen will slow them down straight away. But it says it's some crap about the brakes lifespan of 80 to 100,000 miles, with disc typically being changed because of warping rather than wear. Now, think about that, because I'll come back to it later. So they say they're changing because the discs are warping. Then, unsurprisingly, the same increase in brake lifespan has been found on other electric vehicles too. Cleveley EV, one of the best known EV mechanics in the UK, based in Cheltenham, regularly sees EVs with brakes that have lasted over 100,000 miles. Cleveley EV notes that they typically have to replace EV brake pads not because of wear, but because they've seized up due to lack of use. I mean, honestly, I can't believe a mechanic saying that. A testament to this is Cleveley EV's own mobile mechanic service, which consists of a fleet of electric vans that have been known to regularly cover in excess of 1,000 miles per week. Their top mechanic, James Coates, estimates that their brake pad lifespan will be 100,000 miles, with discs likely to remain unchanged unless they become corroded. So now you've got the warp, the corrode, and they seize up. That's in a positive spin story about EV brake pads lifespans up to 100,000 miles. So we'll remember those three things. Then we go on to Quentin Wilson. Quentin's answering a chap called Rich Stewart. And it says, Rich Stewart's tweet is, even a person of your considerable automotive intelligence has to concur that a heavier car with considerable power is going to wear disc pads and tyres faster than a lighter car regardless of propulsion. And this is where, you know when you're reading a book and you make up somebody's voice in your head? Well, you know Quentin Wilson's voice, don't you? And you know that he comes across, to me, he comes across as smarmy. I've got his voice in my head. So, Rich, smarmy. EVs have regenerative brakes, so pad disc wear is vastly less than ice. Not unusual, and again, not unusual, to see EVs with factory discs and pads at 100,000 miles. No peer-reviewed data to suggest the wear is greater than ICE, in brackets, despite efforts of some. My Tesla's still on factory front tyres at 40,000 miles, rears changed at 39,000. Well, yes, Quentin, your tyres were on 40,000 miles, and you actually carried on until ply cords were sticking out because you're as tight as a duck's arse. There can't be any other reason. You'd rather get an endorsement, £2,500 of fine, not be able to stop, smash into somebody, than change your tyres. So we'll get that sorted. That's straight away. Thanks for that, Quentin. Then somebody else chips in, and I've mentioned this chap before. I quite like him, but I just think he talks crap. He's a doctor. Yeah, Baz, you're a car salesman, he's a doctor. He talks crap. Okay, yeah. EVs tend to use low MU tyres to reduce rolling resistance. So, you know, race cars, when they put those big spoilers on the back, and they reckon that when you're going at full tilt, you could actually drive on the roof of a tunnel because the downforce, which would basically be upforce then, would keep you up there. So everybody else is trying to get good grip. EVs are trying to get rid of it with low MU tyres. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So we'll go back. I'll read it again. EVs tend to use low MU tyres to reduce rolling resistance. Since the compounds are different to sticky ICE tyres, one cannot make a direct comparison, but given the harder compound of low MU tyres, they're likely to emit less particulate in an average case. On regenerative braking, you are exactly correct. So Andy Palmer, he's throwing in with Quentin, 100,000 miles regen braking. He's a doctor, clever guy, he's throwing in with him. We'll go on to the next one. Then we've got one of Cleveley's tweets. On the right is an original TRW brake pad for our MG5 EV. It's covered 100,576 miles. On the left is a brand new pattern Apex brake pad. It's going back in the box for another 100,000 miles. Now, fair enough, that brake pad, it does, it looks like brand new. Now, if your car's going up the motorway and you don't have to brake, then your pads are going to be like that. If you're going around town and you're having to brake all the time, this is in a nice car. They're going to be worn out. In an EV, you've got regen braking. It's very, very difficult to use your brakes when you've got regen braking. I made a comment the other day, it was a sarcastic comment, saying, and I was basically like skitting these lot, saying, oh, EVs you don't use your brakes on EVs. Anyway, one of the EV crowd has taken it up and he's giving me grief. But anyway, so next one. This is a tweet from me. Did you know that EVs have low MU tyres and they don't produce tyre particulates and last for 40,000 miles? No, question mark. Well, neither did this guy, because for the majority of owners, they don't. I've got pictures of discs here off the actual car, and I've got the MOT. At 13,717 miles, all four tyres were knackered. And the discs and pads last 100,000 miles, except for when the alarm goes off and they don't. Basically, when you stop dreaming, you wake up. Another tweet from me. Let's be honest. Well, I'll say Quentin because I was being sarcastic. Let's be honest, Quentin and EV Godfather. The only reason those tyres have a low coefficient of friction is because there's no fucking tread left on them. And they're into snowballs chanting hell that they will see 40,000 miles. Four tyres virtually bald. That's on a Tesla Model 3 long range, 32,000 miles. The discs, honestly, the discs are horrendous. I would say that on one of them, there's probably 5% of the disc working on one side and say 10-15% on the other. That will lead to brake imbalance without a doubt. Then I go on to another one. It's a Kia Soul Max. That's done 5,133 miles, 2022. You can see the discs through the wheels. they are corroded. And if you take into account the corrosion and what the brake is actually touching and the rest is pitted, I would say they will be working on less than 50% as well. But what happens with them is they're so corroded and they rust so quickly that the first tap of your brakes has to get rid of that rust before it even starts working. And I did find out this to my cost a few weeks ago. I did tell everybody, you know, I said in a video yesterday, of all the things that never happened, that never happened the most. It did. Honestly, it did. It scared me to death. So then we go on to Dr. McTurk again. Dr. McTurk says Dundee Taxi Rentals say that brake pads on its 11 Nissan Leaf taxis have a lifespan of 80 to 100,000 miles, 4 times that of their diesel taxis. Again, discs tend to be changed due to a warping rather than wear, unlike a conventionally fueled vehicle, and last twice as long as those on diesel taxis. Then he says, in addition, Cleveland EVs, one of the best known EV mechanics, this is in another write-up, yet another one. One of the best known EV mechanics in the UK, based in Cheltenham, regularly sees EVs with brakes that have lasted over 100,000 miles. The company says if they ever need to replace an EV's brakes, it's not because of wear, but because they've seized up due to lack of use. They don't work. If it's seized up, you're using Regen, you need your brakes, they're not going to work, it's seized. I don't believe they've used this as a positive. I don't believe they've used warping as a positive. Why did this warp? It's uneven cooling. So how do you get uneven cooling on a disc when you know you're going forward, your brake cools down. However, if your caliper has seized, so it's not the brake, the brake pad's not seized, that's not seized to the disc, otherwise the disc won't go round. What's happened is the caliper at the back, the pistons come out and the piston's seized, so it's pressing the caliper and the brake pad against the disc. So effectively you're getting fewer miles because you've got more drag. You're trying to drive the brakes. The discs get hot. You're driving along, you brake, you pull up at traffic lights, the pads are red hot. The pads are in one place on your disc and the rest is cooling down a bit, except for where the pads are. That causes warping. Why is there excess heat? The brake pads are touching the rust and stuff all the time, and it's you know, I don't understand them. I really, I can't. That's what I was saying about being smart and having common sense. Anybody who had any proper common sense wouldn't say that. That's the biggest. It's your brakes. You're driving up the motorway, there's a crash in front of you, you want to brake, your car doesn't brake. What happens? You're part of the accident. Your brakes have to work. So if Regen needs scrapping, scrap it. Your brakes have to work. Again, it's another story, and it's James from Cleveland EV saying this likely to remain unchanged unless they become corroded. Well, they will become corroded. Now this chap, the RAC have commissioned him to do a report on brakes and tyres, and he's a battery doc. He's on LinkedIn, Ewan McTurk, consultant battery electrochemist. He has an EV channel all about EVs. Twitter, all about EVs. Plug Life Television, that's his website, all about EVs. Then he's at City and Financial Global, speaker details, EV Infrastructure Summit 2024. Dr. Ewan McTurk is a consultant battery electrochemist. Next one, Everything Electric North, Ewan McTurk. Fully Charged Show, Ewan McTurk, latest EV battery technology. Now I'd listen, battery technology, I'd be very, very interested. I'd listen to him. But I just don't think the remarks that he's coming out with are true. Speaker profile, consulting Plug Life Television. So that's all on Google, there's loads of them. Now, so to be honest, I started giving them a bit of hassle really. And every car I saw, because I look through the auctions every day, I look through the websites every day to find cars. I am looking actively for EVs. I like EVs. They're perfect for some people, not for everybody. But you can't sell them by lane, which is what's happening at the moment. So I gets to... I was doing something on Twitter the other day. I've done all this aggravation, you know, I've given them quite a lot of aggravation. Nobody answers me. You know, Quentin Wilson hasn't answered, and I can understand Quentin's a big TV star, I'm a used car salesman. I understand it. Ewan McTurk, the same. James, I've had a discussion with James at Cleveland Autos. It didn't end very nice. Well, it didn't end very nice. You know, that's it. No biggie. But then after I've shown all these actual cases and MOTs of brake discs not lasting 100,000 miles, in fact being already warned as corroded at like 10,000 miles and so on, and being changed, and tyres 13,000 miles. So I've printed and I've attached the photos, I've attached legitimate evidence and the actual car itself, and I've got all these records. So if anybody wants to know, if anybody thinks I'm lying, ask me. People say that I'm a bullshitter, one in particular. Well, tell me what I'm bullshitting about. You know, let's have a discussion and I'll show you, because I've got everything and it's all filed away. So after like outing them on these brake discs, people start coming up with things that you should do. Before, you didn't need to do anything. Regen was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So Dr. McTurk on a podcast, burnishing, he's come up with burnishing now. Now listen this. Because with a petrol or diesel car you don't have regenerative braking, you're heavily dependent on the mechanical foot brake to slow the car coming up to a stop. As a result, you end up spewing quite a lot of fine particulates into the atmosphere, or into, I should say, child and pet height within urban areas, which is not good. It's not good, no doubt about it. It used to be a lot worse when brakes were asbestos, you know, and years ago. Nobody bitched about them then. Everybody just got on with it. But now, health and safety, that's good. If you have an electric car, you can use regenerative braking, and that regenerative braking obviously helps to slow down the car using the electric motor. You barely use the foot brake, to the point that some brake pads and discs need to be refurbished, replaced. You know, the very few places refurbish them. You can, the machine's £7,000, it's brilliant, but then you've got labour taking the discs off, putting it on the lathe, doing that, by which time discs are so cheap these days, they just throw the other ones away, throw the brake pads away and put new discs on. So they don't need refurbishing, nobody does it. Or even replaced, because they've rusted up. So you're now replacing perfectly good discs and brakes, not because you've worn them out, but because they've rusted up. Now, what do you think happens to that rust on the discs? Where do you think that goes? It can cause, I forget what the name is, but it's equally bad. It's breathing difficulties and so on. It's iron oxide. And it creates more, I can tell you now, those EVs will create more iron oxide through rusty brakes than the brake particulates, the brake pad particulates. They will, you look at an EV, you look at the wheel, and you'll see brown shit all over the place. That's iron oxide. That's just on the wheels. Imagine the stuff that got away. So all that, and this is what, or even replaced because they've rusted up, because nobody's used them. He thinks it's a good thing. Your brakes aren't going to work when you need them. They're not going to work. There's actually a bell curve with brake pads and discs on electric cars. You need to give them a good stab at some point or another. Drive to an industrial estate, take it up to speed, make sure there's nothing behind you, slam on the brakes and condition them. Basically, burnish them. I believe is the technical term. That's what I'm looking for. So you kind of burnish the brakes and yeah, there we go. I sound like a proper mechanic now. Doc, you do not sound like a proper mechanic. You really don't. A proper mechanic would be laughing at you. Just like you put welding goggles on, you wouldn't sound like a proper welder. You sound like a doctor. Yeah, you just want to burnish the brakes, mate. Keep them in good nick. That's what you do to keep an EV's brake pads and discs in excellent shape. So, you know, it's not bad enough that you've got to go and sit for hours charging your EV. You've then got to go to an industrial estate, jab the brakes a few times, do emergency stops to keep your brakes working. What if they don't work on the way to the industrial estate? What if you've left it too late? A nice car's brakes work all the time, virtually 100% all the time. When do an EV's brakes work? It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. Your typical petrol or diesel car has a brake pad disc lifespan of about 40,000 miles. I was going to say per charge, I'm so used to dealing with EVs, but 40,000 mile lifespan for brake pads. In an EV, you can be looking at easily in excess of 100,000 miles. So, right, so caliper seize, they corrode, they warp. You have to keep on top of them by doing emergency stops and going to industrial estates. Emergency stops, what does that do to your tyres? What does it do to your suspension? What does it do to all your other components, do you think? Is it good for a car doing an emergency stop? Your gearbox flies forward, your engine flies forward, or tries to fly forward. So your engine mounts, your gearbox mounts, your prop shaft, just about anything, your shock absorbers, your springs, all under load that they don't need to be because your brakes don't work. All right, fair enough. I can speak from my lived experience of my very old school Tesla Model S, which has done very similar mileage to James' MG5 from Cleveland EV Mobile. So it's up there in the mid 130s. I quite recently had to replace all the pads and discs, but it was because they'd actually warped rather than worn. Have you ever driven a car with warped discs? Well, first of all, you get a vibration through the foot brake and your steering wheel goes like that. I can't believe it, honestly. They were just that old, so replace them. Take them out on a back road and burnish them. You want to do that. You want to burnish them and bring them in, and yeah, they're great. So anyway, long story short is that you're looking at 2.5 times the life. You're not. You're looking at less. Honestly, I've checked all the MOTs. That is just absolute garbage. Here's a tweet. So only an evangelist and their disciples could possibly think that having to replace your brakes because they've seized up rather than worn out is a good thing. Just throwing this out there, but wouldn't it be better if your brakes fucking worked? Okay, can anyone spot a costly repair coming up on the next MOT? I'll give you a clue. It's not the one with the wheel that is covered in brown iron oxide particulates. 8,802 miles. Regen saves me a fortune. It harvests electricity, one pedal driving, and all I have to do now is put new calipers, discs and brake pads every 9,000 miles and hopefully not have to do an emergency stop in the meantime. One of those, you can see it's blue. You can see the disc blue. That means the caliper's stuck, the pad's on, and it's actually tempered the disc. The disc got so hot, it's got to a temperature where the disc turned blue. We used to harden the tips of chisels by tempering them in the furnace and then quenching them. So it's like that. You go through a puddle, quench it, and you've hardened your brake disc. It probably won't work at all if they're hardened. That's on. I've got pictures here. The alloy is full of rust, and that's a Volkswagen ID3 family, 2021 with 8,802 miles. Somebody sent me a message. EV Man on his channel. I've spoken to EV Man before. Again, that didn't go down very well. We don't see eye to eye. He used to be on my case all the time, but he's stopped now. I can't imagine why. EV Man on his channel said that all EV owners should do 2 or 3 emergency stops from 60 mph plus where safe every month to keep the brakes in working order. Otherwise the brakes will rust and seize. And he's an EV fanboy. Well, that's fair enough. So you're doing 3 emergency stops. What's it do to your brakes? What's it do to your suspension, as I've mentioned? What does it do to your tyres? What does it do to your neck? You get whiplash. It's just ridiculous. So I've put, so instead of your disc going rusty and your brake calipers seizing up, you wear tyres out and your suspension components instead. Perhaps EVs really are responsible for the terrible state of the road after all. I'm not sure he's entirely thought it through. So perhaps, next time you go on an industrial estate and you see a big pothole, you can put it down to EVs. And it was the EVs making the potholes, doing their emergency stop so that the brakes work when you need it. I've done another one here, not exactly polite. It didn't address to anybody, it's just a tweet, so I'm not calling anybody. It's just like a general, oi shit for brains. What have I told you about burnishing? Do you want to fucking stop in an emergency or not? I kid you not, 5,133 miles on this EV. The discs are knackered. Next one. This is aimed, not addressed, or in his name included. Oi shit for brains. What have I told you about burnishing? Yeah, I know I've never done it myself, and I've just made it up because that country and western keeps posting photos of discs that are fucked at a fraction of the mileage. Quentin says it's not unusual for them to do 100,000, and he's twigged that it's very unusual. So I mentioned this about corrosion, and Ewan replied to me, corrosion is mentioned in the second screenshot. Dealers should make more of an effort to let customers know about the bell curve of brake use versus lifespan, and the advantage of giving the brakes a good use every few weeks to keep them clean. I despair. So then I've put, you know what would be even better, Doc? If the bell ends would give the bullshit a rest, then perhaps there wouldn't be any need for us dealers to correct the misinformation and manage customer expectations. Not unusual, my arse. He's original treat, except that's not misinformation. James is an experienced mechanic with a fleet of high mileage EVs who services EVs with a wide range of use patterns across the country. Whether you like it or not, he's reporting real world examples. Then he says, another real world example, the first set of brakes of my own EV were replaced just under a year ago, having covered about 125,000 miles. They weren't worn or corroded despite the car being constantly driven with max regen and no burnishing, but had become warped. Good innings. Yeah, right. He's no idea how long those, I'm pretty sure he's not done 130,000 miles in it. I don't know the registration number of his car. If anybody does, let me know and I'll check the MOTs. I've checked his car before. I saw the registration number on a video when he had this Nissan Leaf, and I'd checked the MOT because I like to know all these people that go on about EVs not needing servicing and so on. You look at their MOTs and you know what you get from that? EVs need servicing. So I sent him another tweet. What about this car you own, Doc? Just about the time you wrote this article on brake particulates. That was the one for the RAC. The video on his channel, the date of uploading was about the same, so I'm assuming he still had it. But even if he didn't, even if it had gone on to the next owner hasn't done this. 61,554 miles. Near side rear parking brake inoperative on one side. Near side rear parking brake inoperative on one side, grabbing. So that means while you're driving, it's trying to slow you down. Brake lever has insufficient reserve travel parking brake pedal. Parking brake efficiency below requirements. Offside front seat belt webbing, slightly damaged or frayed. Usually that's a dog, it happens. Front brake disc worn, pitted or scored, not seriously weakened. Well, it's not seriously weakened because the rust is on the outside. It's still the same size, the rust grows outwards. Corrosion, pitting goes inwards, but rust comes out. So he had the parking brake done on that before he got his MOT. Those were all fails. But he left the offside front seat webbing. It's passenger, isn't it? You know, who cares? Front brake disc worn, pitted or scored. So he didn't do the brake disc. So on the next MOT, you'll never guess what. Offside front seat belt webbing slightly damaged or frayed. Front brake disc worn, pitted or scored, but not seriously weakened. Heavily inner faces. So that's not going to pull up. Front service brake fluctuating, but not excessively. So not only is his brakes not going to work, but they'll be fluctuating, braking balance, it'll be trying to pull to one side. That's about the same time as he wrote an article on brakes. So he knew that what he was writing wasn't correct. Guess what happened next? You're blocked. After that, he didn't reply to me, he just blocked me. You know, I mean, call me what you will. These people aren't your friends. These people want to make money out of EVs. The whole businesses are geared for EVs. Me, I'm not a very good liar. I can't lie. You can see it on my face. If I don't like you, you'll be able to tell straight away. That's why I like being self-employed, because if I don't like somebody, I won't deal with them. And you go to other places and, you know, if you've got a boss, you've got to deal with people you don't like. But these, you know, I've seen so many over the years, workshops. It got so bad that I used to take a photograph of the discs before I put it in the workshop for a sales check over. Because when the workshop were quiet, discs and pads, you know, all the cars needed discs and pads. When they were busy, the brakes were fine. I even went to the trouble, when I was at a Mercedes dealer, of negotiating a deal with another Mercedes dealer. I could never have done it. You know, it was all bluff. But I negotiated a deal with another Mercedes dealer's service departments to do my checkovers on my used car, because our service department was ripping us off so much. We called it in the trade wooden dollars. And all it means is they don't really mind, you know, because the salesman don't make as much commission, but the parts guy gets a bit of commission on parts, and the service, you know, they do the kind of the piecework, and they get an hour and a half to service a car, or 2 hours, and they'll do it in an hour and a half. That's all this business about EV servicing. Mechanics get bonus if they can complete a service quicker. They get 8 hours to sell out, say. If they can do 10 hours a day, if they can sell out 10 hours a day, they don't have to work anymore, but they get 2 hours extra. That's your car that they're skimping on. It's wrong, isn't it? That's wrong. And yet, all you lot are calling me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.